And welcome to the Change from Within, a New Vision for the 21st Century Prosecutor. I'm delighted to moderate this event. We have some really terrific people here. I have to say at the start that this event is being recorded, so if you ask a question, you are consenting to being recorded. We have passed out biographies of the speakers so that we don't have to spend a lot of time. They have I encourage you to read what they've done because they're really super impressive backgrounds. But I'll just sort of go down the line here to just say who's who, and then I'm going to turn it over to Miriam to start, and then I'll ask a bunch of questions. We'll definitely have time at the end for questions. I really want to have you all be able to ask these folks some questions. So we have Miriam Krinsky, who is the Executive Director of Fair and Just Prosecution. She'll tell you a little bit about the organization and about a book that she's just written. But her organization supports progressive prosecutors around the country. Unfortunately, Alvin Bragg could not make it because he had what he thought was an important case starting today in Manhattan, having to do with the Trump organization. Thought that was more important than being at Harvard Law School. Okay, his call, not ours, but we're sorry to miss him. Hopefully we'll get him here at another time. Sarah George is the Chittenden County State's Attorney in Vermont. Eric Gonzalez is the Kings County District Attorney. And Mark Gonzalez is a Nueces County District Attorney. I'm going to turn it over to Miriam to first sort of set the stage and talk a little bit about fair and just prosecution and about the movement of progressive prosecutors in general, and then she'll turn it back to me after a few minutes, and I'll start asking some questions.
Perfect. So thanks, Alex, for hosting us, inviting us. I don't remember the year when we were last here. You probably have that. Feels like an eternity ago. I don't remember if Mark remembers the year, but it was a few years back when we first came to Harvard. And actually, I think it was one of our first few opportunities to start talking at the time about what is this new moment that we find ourselves in. And little did we know that what was a moment in early 2017 would very much become a movement, growing in number, growing in impact, growing in both successes and pushback. And I know we're going to have a chance to talk about that. Just a few thoughts to frame and to give you a sense of who and what is fair and just prosecution, and why did we think it important to tell the stories in this new book, Change from Within, about these inspiring and incredible leaders that we feel so privileged to work with. So I think in terms of framing, and I know many of you hear these numbers over and over again, and it never seems to me like we can say them enough. We know, as we sit here now, that there will be over 2 million people spending the night in our prisons and jails in our country. We know, and again, this figure is trotted out time and time again, but it's so important, I think, to kind of struggle and grapple with it and ask why and how we found our way here. We know that we represent maybe around 5% of the world's population. We represent 20% of the incarcerated population. 40% of the individuals who are incarcerated for life without parole are in our country, nearly half in our country alone. We know that until somewhat recently, we stood alone in the Western world in putting juveniles to death for crimes that they committed at a moment in time when their brains weren't fully developed, from what we know from research, from studies, and only, in recent past did this country disavow the juvenile death penalty. We know that we are pretty much alone in the Western world in terms of continuing to perpetuate the machinery of death in our country. Some states have moved away from it, but the death penalty, is alive and well in many parts of this country, including in situations, and hopefully Mark will have an opportunity to talk about this unbelievable situation, including situations most recently where the DA, Mark Gonzalez, and the defense lawyer both said, we do not want this individual to be put to death, and the individual was nonetheless executed. Just extraordinary, including innocent people we continue to kill in our country who are sitting on death row. So why all of that? Why do I start there? Because these individuals, elected prosecutors, have the power and the clout to put up stop signs on all of that. They have the power as gatekeepers to start to shut down this pipeline into the criminal legal system, to do as Sarah has done and say no more to cash bail, no more to criminalizing individuals who are struggling with substance use disorder, to do what Eric has done, which is to look back and try to perpetuate post-conviction justice and ensure that individuals have an opportunity for a second look if they're serving decades behind bars, to exonerate, as Eric and his office have done in dozens of cases, individuals who should no longer be deemed to have suffered from a criminal conviction because the system went amok. To do what Mark has done in saying, I will not criminalize individuals who are using and possessing marijuana. I will not stand behind, in the state of Texas, the death penalty anymore. I don't believe that that's what justice is about. So, and so much more. They have the ability, with the stroke of a pen, to do so much, to keep young people from going into adult court, to deflect rather than simply divert cases, to treat young people in a way that is commensurate with their brain development. So, having seen what it looks like when prosecutors do harm, I feel very privileged that in early 2017, Fair and Just Prosecution was created to start to work with leaders like this, to bring them together, to create community, to file amicus briefs and defend them when individuals are trying to strip them of their discretion or trying to override the decisions that they're making, to bring their voices together on things like reproductive rights, on things like the importance of valuing the need to protect immigrants as part of our community, to stand against some things that the federal government has tried to do in past administrations, and to support opportunities for change. So that is the moment that we find ourselves in. That is why we felt it was important in Change from Within to tell their stories. And that's why we feel so privileged to have a chance, thanks, Alex, to you and all of you, and we'll talk more about it later, to hear what they're doing, the challenges they're encountering, and how we try to bring law students into their offices to help carry forward this work and perpetuate this moment of change. And I do want to call out two members of our team at FJP, Cam Deshala sitting back there, Rebecca Blair sitting over there. They will, be passing stuff around to all of you if they haven't yet, here to help answer any questions. And again, thank you all. I know that you are all obviously the Halloween atheists because you're here rather than going out and starting the partying for Halloween. But again, thank you for joining us today for the conversation.
Thanks, Miriam. And I'm hoping there's plenty of time for Halloween partying after this. My first question to the three prosecutors here is, can you tell us a little bit about how you came to where you are in terms of your journey to becoming a progressive prosecutor? And could you also maybe talk specifically about what it means to be a progressive prosecutor? Like, what have you changed in your office? What have you done? How have you changed prosecution specifically? Miriam alluded to some of the things that you all did, but if you could elaborate on that, that would be terrific. And Sarah, I don't know if you want to start. That'd be great.
Ladies first.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks for being here. How I got to where I was, I actually went to law school to become a public defender. I got my master's degree in forensic psychology, and during that program became very aware of the injustices in our justice system. So went to law school because I wanted to dismantle the criminal legal system and thought that that's the best way to do it. But during law school, I actually did a clerkship at our public defender's office, and I had clients, and it's a long story, but through that summer that I was doing that clerkship, I had a lot of cases in which I was going to different prosecutors within the office I now run, asking them to have compassion for my clients, asking them to dismiss cases against my clients, asking them for particular things or outcomes. And in some cases, those prosecutors had compassion and mercy and cared about actual public safety and would give me what I was asking for. And in most of the cases, they would not. And so that experience is how I decided that if I wanted to really dismantle this system in a way that provided true public safety for my community, that I needed to become a prosecutor. So I did that straight out of law school, and then 6 years of that working underneath an elected, when he became our attorney general and his seat was vacant, I realized that I had been doing what I could on the cases that were assigned to me, but those prosecutors who didn't have compassion and mercy in the cases that I had were still prosecutors in that office. And so I felt like they were still able to commit a lot of harm in the community. And I knew that they were, in fact, doing that just based on lunch conversations and way that I was seeing them resolve their cases. So when the opportunity came, having no interest in politics and never thinking it was something I wanted to do, I sought the position, and against all odds, I got it. And so I was able to get rid of the prosecutors that were in that office that I felt were harming our community and replace them with public defenders that I knew I wouldn't have to convince why we were going to do things differently. And what I've done, I think the biggest thing I've done is actually and I think the most powerful thing that prosecutors, elected prosecutors, can do is not charge everybody, not depend on the legal system to fix societal issues, especially once things like the pandemic happen. Prosecutors are relied on more and more and more and more, and to actually decline to bring in cases is probably the greatest power that we have. So I've found trying to find ways constantly to not charge people and to find community services that those folks can connect with instead of going through our system. And then eliminating the use of cash bail, attempting to divert or decline any cases possible, using probation and parole as absolute last resorts, incarceration as an absolute last resort, all the way up the line, just always looking for off-ramps constantly rather than the on-ramps that are typically and historically used by prosecutors and police. So I think we'll probably get into some more specifics through, so I'll save those for then. And just what do I believe a progressive prosecutor is? I don't actually love the term because I think that it has become a weapon against the work, but I think overall what it means is finding ways that the legal system doesn't become the answer to societal issues.
Hi, everyone. I'm Eric Gonzalez. I'm the elected district attorney in Brooklyn, New York. And, sort of like Sarah, I never imagined running for election or being elected district attorney. Brooklyn is about 2.7 million people. It's a large jurisdiction. My office is the fourth largest DA's office in the country. We have about 550 prosecutors and about 1,100 support staff. And, I grew up in East New York and Brooklyn. So those of you who are familiar with Brooklyn or New York City, in the 80s and 90s, East New York was called on the front page of the newspaper the murder capital of New York City. The year that I was applying to law school, there were 126 people murdered in my precinct. It's just one police precinct out of 23 in Brooklyn. And so it was a community with a lot of violence, a community that had a lot of, social ills. And it was a neighborhood that had beautiful people and hardworking people. And as a young person, I felt let down by government. I felt that policing systems did not keep us safe, and that often, people who look like me, and East New York is predominantly African American and Latino, were criminalized in that system while still not keeping us safe. And so I made the decision to go to law school to become a prosecutor. When I was in law school, I used my summers to clerk for judges and to clerk at a district attorney's office, and I started in the office right out of law school. There's a way that prosecutors' offices operate, and it was really important for me to be in that office. I chose to go to Brooklyn because that's where I lived and grew up. I was one of maybe, a handful of lawyers of color in the office, even though it's such a large office. And I worked my way really from the very bottom to the top. When I got promoted to a deputy bureau chief position, I was only the second Hispanic supervisor in the office of, over almost 600 lawyers at that time. Fast forward, so my thinking about the job and the role of the job was different. And in particular, my thinking was that we were underserved by law enforcement, and that cases that would have and could have been solved in other communities of Brooklyn were not solved in East New York and Brownsville and Bed-Stuy and all of the neighborhoods that have really suffered through gun violence in New York City. So I wanted to work on those issues in the office. I did. In 2014, a brand new district attorney came into power and asked me, largely based on my reputation of thinking differently in the office, to become chief assistant district attorney. And that person was Ken Thompson. He was the first African American ever elected in Brooklyn's history. Unfortunately, 2.5 years into his term, he passed away, and I was appointed to be the acting district attorney until the next election cycle. And so in 2018, I ran for election on my own and won. I became the first Hispanic DA in New York State history out of the 62 DAs. That gave me the real option to kind of change the way my office worked. And we had done some really good work with Ken Thompson. We created the first conviction review unit. We stopped prosecuting marijuana cases. We worked to vacate summons warrants and to do things that had not been done previously in New York City. And when I became the district attorney, one of the very first things that I did is change the policy on immigration policies. I hired immigration lawyers and made sure that non-citizens were protected from issues of deportation and others in our plea bargaining and sentence recommendations. And I really started to pursue what we'll now call this progressive agenda, although I don't think it was called that back then. But it was really clear for me as district attorney that I wanted to serve marginalized communities in Brooklyn that I thought had not been served previously, and really made it a focus to challenge the police to do as much work in solving crime in our neighborhoods as in other neighborhoods in Brooklyn. I think that one of the things that I've done is change the culture of that district attorney's office, and the people who we seek to bring in want to do things differently. But there are a lot of things I started to say in the very beginning that are sort of the routine ways that district attorneys' offices operate. And I took, a mental inventory of all of those practices and I will call them the default practices of a DA's office. And I started to challenge each one of those default practices. Because if you ingrain those changes in the practice of what's happening in the office, when you're no longer there, that default practice remains the same. And so some of the best work that I did, and I can talk a lot about different policies and programs I ran, but was changing default policies in the office. And so, for example, in 2018, I announced that my office would, as a matter of practice, rescind all of the letters that we sent to the parole board over the last 40, 50 years, automatically saying we oppose parole, and said those no longer are the position of the office. When we were, there's mandatory parole on the conviction in New York State called post-release supervision, and the practice had always been to ask for the maximum period. The practice became to ask for the minimum period unless there was a reason to do otherwise. Same thing for bail. It was the practice of our office to ask for bail on virtually every case. And I changed the practice to say that if you were going to ask for bail, you needed to get a supervisor's permission. This is all down 2017, 2018. So those default policies are the kind of things that have led to mass supervision and mass incarceration. And by really just sort of getting to those in your own office, you can have a big impact. And, among other things, I, sued ICE because they were making arrests in courthouses of witnesses and victims. And the state attorney general joined my lawsuit, and we prevailed. Same thing happened, I think, with Rachel Rollins when she was Suffolk County DA. Her case, I think, got overturned, but the Brooklyn case stayed good law. And actually, we entered into a settlement with DOJ to keep those practices in place. So there's a lot that that someone who thinks about criminal justice or, how they can make an impact in protecting civil liberties can do at a DA's office. Mark, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, good afternoon. Good afternoon. First off, I want to thank 31 or 33 of y'all that are in here. For whatever reason, you decided to step in this classroom and hear from some of my good friends and colleagues about the great work that they're doing. And when someone said, hey, you want to go speak at Harvard, a small town guy from, South Texas, you dang right, I'm going to go speak at Harvard so I can hopefully energize and give people perspective of what we're dealing with and how you can become part of that change. And so I'm here. I finally stopped sweating because I ran over here to be on time. But the way I got here is almost, I don't know, I call it fate. And I do believe in that. And I also believe that you guys are here for a reason. When I was 19, I got arrested. I come from a background where, I don't know if you guys know what Red Ribbon Week is. We just did talks all over Texas about that, and we do stuff like that. But when I was 19, I got arrested for a DWI, and I didn't know any college graduates. I didn't know any lawyers. I didn't know anybody. And so I went to court. I went to jail that night, and I went to court. And a few months later, I get a letter in the mail, and my mother says, I'll go to court with you because we don't know lawyers. If you plead guilty, they'll be nice to you. Don't ever do that. You're in law school. I'm sure you wouldn't. But long story short, when I was there, I noticed things that I did not like. I noticed that me taking my mom, I got the 1-year probation deal, and there was a Navy pilot next to me, white guy, white judge, white lawyer, and his case gets dismissed because he's a good guy, and we don't want to ruin his life. And for me, that's kind of like what was my, okay. The light bulb went on in my head, and I'm like, I'm going to try to be a lawyer. First, you got to graduate undergrad. All right, I could try to do that. Then how do you become a lawyer? Well, it wasn't like it is now. You can't Google, even though back then we all have heard of Harvard, but back then you couldn't Google, how do I become a lawyer? What do I do? What steps do I take? So somehow I got in. I passed, barely. I took the bar. Didn't pass, but I passed. And here I am, and I became an attorney, and I was a defense attorney from day one. I always knew that I wanted to be a defense attorney so I could help my friends. But during the practice of my law, which was very successful, man, I was making a lot of money. But I couldn't help everyone, and I realized that one day. And so I ran to be the DA against everybody's advice. Like, bro, you'll never win. You're a defense attorney. Look at you. And I won. And I ended up winning again. And so I tell you all this because that was the way that I realized that I can make real change. The change that my colleagues talk about with policies and stuff that, it may not look so romantic whenever, we're talking here. But when you meet someone, what, y'all got supermarkets here? What's your supermarket? CVS? What? Star Market. We got H-E-Bs in Texas. And when I go to an H-E-B and an old lady or, comes up to me and says, mijo, thank you so much. You didn't send my son to prison for a joint or whatever. Those are things that we actually get to grab and feel and see. I'm sorry. And so those are the changes that I want to share with you because they actually impact our community. And one of the main things that I'm super proud about is I've equaled the playing field. Imagine that. In Texas, they're attacking our discretion, right? Because I don't want to prosecute on the death penalty or I don't want to prosecute individuals with small marijuana. But when it was perfectly okay not to prosecute somebody for lynching people of color, it was all right, at least in Texas. And so today, though, they're trying to take that away from us. And so one of the greatest things that I could say, as long as I'm the DA, it's an equal playing field, whether you're white, black, brown, rich, or anything else, because that's the way it had always been. And maybe not just in Texas, maybe where you're from too. He's a good person. We went to school together. He deserves an opportunity. Well, you know what? Everybody deserves an opportunity. And that's one of the biggest things that I'm so happy and proud to say that that's what happens in Nueces County. I'll say maybe two other things. Our cite and release program, the old lady whose son didn't go to jail was because of our cite and release program. You get caught with a small amount of marijuana, we're not going to take you into custody. Number one, it costs money. Number two, you could get beat up in there and sue us. And number three, if you have a job, you may lose it. No one really realizes the small impact of just one little policy. And so that's one of the other things that I'm super proud about. And also, I think I wrote something down. Oh, yeah. I'm not seeking the death penalty anymore in Texas. And that is that's probably worse than being a defense attorney as the DA, but at least in Texas, it's something that we're not going to do in my county. And so I'm very honored and glad to be here. I hope that some of y'all hear some stuff today, which may send you in a different direction or confirm the direction that you actually want to travel in. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Those were very inspiring words from all of you. And but I want to sort of look forward and ask you. I won't call it progressive prosecution, but let's say this approach, this movement, this way of thinking about prosecution. Where is it headed? And what's the future of it? And to frame it. You might say you all receive some attacks from both sides, right? So from the right, there's pressure about not being tough enough on crime, and there are progressive, quote unquote, prosecutors who get attacked and recall campaigns and limits on their discretion. So there's pressure in that direction, and there's also, frankly, pressure sometimes from the left that you're not doing enough, that you're still prosecuting, you're still putting people in jail, that you could do more, that you need to do more. So how do you manage those critiques from both sides? How do you think about that? And what's the future? Where are we going to be in 5 years, 10 years?
Same order?
As you like.
Same order, I think, would go good.
Okay.
Well,
Mark has spoken.
Great. All right. So I think the first thing I would say is that the media, I'm sure we'll get into this, but the media plays a really big role in how this work is viewed. And whenever one of us deals with a recall, for example, one of our good friends, Chesa in San Francisco, went through a recall effort that was unfortunately successful, and it was all any of our attackers wanted to talk about. It was used in every news story. I was in a contested election at the time. It came up constantly as this renewed feeling that this movement was done. when at the same time we had counterparts all over the country winning their contested elections on the same exact day that Chase's was successful. And nobody was talking about those. The media was not focusing on those. So I think that I'm super optimistic because we kind of know what to look for and we are paying attention to everything and not just one particular place, and about how the media is portraying each of our jurisdictions or this work in general. And as a whole, I think that 5 or 10 years from now, this, Miriam often talks about how when she first started Fair and Just Prosecution, there was, a handful of folks in the room. Now we go to convenings and there isn't enough room for all of us. And there's also, I think amongst all of us in Fair and Just Prosecution, we represent 22%, 20%? Around 20% of the country's population. So that's super inspiring. That is millions of people that we can influence, whose communities we can alter and make safer. So I feel really optimistic that in 5 to 10 years, we're going to have just a growing number of leaders that are doing this work. And how do you balance it? I mean, it's so true. I get attacked from both sides. And I think that one thing, I frankly don't pay much attention to the right side anymore because it's based on lies and fear, and it's never based on actual facts. And so I tend not to pay any attention to that. The folks coming from the left, the more progressive folks saying I need to do more, are typically right. And what I am constantly talking with them about is that I can't do it all by myself. And so really figuring out what I can do in a safe way for the community, but also recognizing that our legislature has to play a role, or that community organizations have to step up and play a bigger role. We need to get new legislators if they're not doing what everybody wants. Because if we don't do that part, if we miss that part or we leave it out, that's what opens the door to the recalls. That's what opens the doors to the governors thinking that they can come in and take this work over and change that course. I know that Mark has dealt with that a little bit in Texas lately. Their governor not liking the sort of squad that they have in Texas of progressive prosecutors. So I think that it is bigger than us ultimately, and especially for the folks that are coming from the left. But overall, I am grateful that, at least in my jurisdiction, I don't have to wait for the legislature to do a lot of the things that I've wanted to do. You can just do it overnight. And, progressive prosecutors do have that power, and we can change the way that things are going. And overall, our communities are with us. When we do have contested elections, it is almost certain we will win, and we will win by a lot. And so, the community is starting to speak up and recognize that these roles even exist and that they are elected. Most folks don't even know that. So I think that just by having organizations like this and coming to law schools and talking about it, people are recognizing that they can have a say in how their community approaches public safety.
They're tough questions on this issue, right? There's a real polarization in our country, and crime has been used as a political wedge to divide communities against each other. And what we're seeing in New York State is a governor's race in which the Republican governor candidate is, saying he's going to remove prosecutors on day one if he doesn't agree with their policies, and so that is a reality in what's happening. We saw that happen in Florida with our friend Andrew Warren getting removed by Governor DeSantis there. So, this is a really pitched battle. But I agree with Sarah. When we look at election cycles across America, progressive prosecutors in their jurisdiction continue to win. And I think, there's not a clear definition of what that progressive prosecutor looks like. It depends on your jurisdiction. What I'm capable of doing in Brooklyn is more than someone can maybe do in, parts of South Carolina, but they're still moving the needle in their jurisdictions. For me, the role of the prosecutor, and again, understanding why I got into this job at the first place, even as an assistant district attorney, I felt underserved by the prosecutor's office growing up. And so what I've done is to continuously try to transfer power back to the community to make decisions. Not only will we shrink the size of our criminal justice system, but really give the people in Brooklyn more of a say on what safety looks like to them, what fairness looks like. And so we've engaged in a number of opportunities to transfer power back to the community. We have something in Brownsville that allows community violence interrupters and some stakeholders to answer 911 calls directly and not have the police come out as the first responders. In Bedford-Stuyvesant in Brooklyn, I have a program that is diverting people out of gang life and having it run by community-based leadership and with job skills and cognitive behavioral therapy and other things to get people who would otherwise wind up in prison out of this. But it's a real commitment that I've made not to make all of the decisions from my office and just really listening to the communities we serve about what they want. So we're spearheading different programs in different neighborhoods to kind of give the community direct access to it, and and making them responsible for things that happen in their community. We have a program called Reset that I will refuse to prosecute certain cases, and I will turn the person who's been arrested back over to the community for programming and therapy. And as long as they're participating in that, I'll decline to prosecute that case and have an exit ramp for that case. So I think that is sort of a lot of the future of this work, which is understanding that communities who deal with violence often have the solutions to that, and not all the solutions have to come from government, and really giving them the resources to deal with root and systemic problems that they have in their neighborhoods. And so I'm a big cheerleader for giving money and resources to community organizations and grassroots people in the neighborhoods to make these decisions for themselves. And as district attorney, I'm standby, ready to help them if it needs my help. But in a lot of cases, I think that they can resolve these things. And we've seen more recently a lot of people who've got into the field of violence interruption. And I think that's a way of reducing our reliance on police responses by having people in the community who want to fill these voids. And so I'm supporting that work in Brooklyn. And I think in 5 years, we're going to see a lot, many more models of that, which is the police will not have to be first responders to a lot of these issues, but a well-resourced community response can handle a lot of this. I don't know if I missed anything, but
I'm going to say that everything that they said, it echoes, especially in Texas. Right now, we have a very heated governor's race. We have Abbott versus Beto O'Rourke, and Texas is kind of different than here. And many of my colleagues' jurisdictions, it's almost like the Wild Wild West. I mean, and here I am out, by myself, and ultimately, I'm not going to make probably everyone happy, but it's easy because the thing that I tell myself every time I do something is I'm doing it for the right reasons, right? Like I have a motto and we have a little challenge coin and we give them out to people. I should have brought some today. I might have one, but it says do the right thing. And that is the simplest saying that you can have. And it's also the hardest, right? Because sometimes you have to do the right thing even when it's not popular. And then this time in politics, almost everything you do can be skewed to not being popular to one way or the other. But what we try to do, though, is base things off in statistics, right? And policies that are driven with numbers that show whether a community is safer or there are real issues here. And for far too long, I've been an attorney since 2006. And when I first got into the DA's office, there were no statistics on, how many people committed this crime, were they of color, what area of the county did they come from. And now we're starting to try to develop these policies and practices with help from, whether it's universities or community partners that we're forming to show, okay, this is what's actually going on. And the narratives can be so frustrating, especially when you know the statistics, right? Like in Texas right now, if I live 2 hours from Mexico, and I have a house on the border, and everyone in the media will say there's a huge border crisis, right? And there are people that are constantly coming over, and it's something that needs to definitely be addressed. And the other narrative is that fentanyl is coming over and killing everyone in Texas, and they're disguising it as candy, and it's Halloween, so you better be careful because you don't want your kids to die. And so the main campaign they just rolled out is called One Pill Can Kill. And it's definitely true. But if you look at the statistics, out of the entire state of Texas, which is like 30 million plus, 1,777 people have actually passed away. So the actual, statistically, it's not as big of a problem as the media would want you to have. And so every time, that's what I'm trying to use to educate individuals, because even though sometimes they'll say, well, your statistics aren't real, actually, and they are. I don't know how you combat that, though. When someone doesn't believe in facts or statistics, I'm still figuring that out. But at least I go armed with something more than my emotion. And so that's one of the ways that we're trying to show what we're doing is right, and whether we're talking to the left or we're talking to the right, because most of us in any setting, in any community, is typically, we're all in the middle. We all agree on some things. We may not agree on everything, but most of us have the same things and wants, right? Good life, to be happy, to be safe, to provide for yourselves and your family.
So I could ask a million more questions, but I feel like this is an incredible opportunity for the students to, talk to you and ask questions. So I really want to turn it over, and Cam is going to take around the microphone. So questions from the students for these remarkable prosecutors.
I don't think I need the microphone. Can you hear me?
We can.
Hear you.
All right, great. So I have a few questions that ask a million, but the main thing that I want to ask is what your relationship is like with police departments. And I have friends from a while ago on Dallas PD. I know a couple years ago there was a lot of friction with at least NYPD and prosecutors in New York. So what are those relationships like? How are you messaging like these programs that sound very good but might be making things more difficult for them potentially, or giving them extra work? How do those relationships really go?
So I'll start off and I'll make it brief, because that's a great question. Most people would think that me and the police department actually are at odds. And I'll be honest, the gang unit probably doesn't like me, but that's okay. That's for another, forum or presentation. That's a long story. So, but what I will tell you is that our relationships with them, at least my PD and all my agencies, I'm there for them, right? Even if they don't want me sometimes, I'm still there. And everything that we try to institute, we want their input, because ultimately, I'm not an officer, I'm not a cop. I tell people that all the time. I'll show up somewhere and they'll be like, hey, the DA's here. I'm like, hey, bro, chill, I'm not a cop. And that's the truth. And so these policies and practices, believe it or not, cite and release, law enforcement loves it. You know why? Because they don't have to haul in a kid for a joint and waste 3 or 4 hours sitting in a line in jail and not being able to answer the real serious calls like, aggravated assault, sexual assault, the big things that, that really pose a danger to the community. And so when they start to see the changes in why we're doing these things, and you take that opportunity to explain that to them and get their input and their ownership, it seems to work out, man. I have a great relationship with my chief. He calls me. I'm on the text chat. Anytime there's a big, something huge going on in my community, I get a text. I go out to the scene. Just the other day, there was a active shooter at a high school, and this had just happened with Uvalde. And I don't know if I'm sure y'all have heard about this, but Texas was, it's been kind of wild because of Uvalde. And so every time there's an active shooter at a school, Now with social media, kids put it out and the parents start flooding the schools, and it's a very dangerous situation when you have 300 parents. Then you have officers who are trying to do their jobs. And so I go, and like a month ago, I mean, it got bad, and officers almost tased a parent. I told them to put their taser up. I calmed everyone down, and the community, for whatever reason, what it was trying to was listening to me, but not to the officers. So I was that bridge between my community, who looks like me, talks like me, and officers who were trying to do their job. And so I would say, I mean, maybe they won't say, but I think we have a good relationship.
I think there's a lot of narrative around the friction, and there is definitely friction. But on a day-to-day basis, your office and the police department and the court system and the public defender are going to work together on cases every day. And, 90% of the time there's agreement on what happens. Now, when you initiate a policy change that impacts the police department, it's unusual for them in a place like New York City, where the New York City Police Department is 35,000 members strong, and their unions have millions of dollars. They like to be in charge, and they take umbrage if a prosecutor is going to change up the practices that impact their members. And so what you'll hear most of my colleagues say is that the day-to-day operations with rank and file and supervisors in the police departments that they work with are fine, and they work. There's often friction with the FOPs or the unions, and that's really where you hear. And occasionally there may be a run-in with a chief or something in the police department. But day in, day out, I think these are healthy relationships. And I think that, prosecutors, especially those who consider themselves the people's lawyer, are representing what their community wants, and it's giving a voice. So in Brooklyn, when I've had some run-ins with the police department, I would say overwhelmingly my community has been supportive of the pushback that I've given. I'll give an example. During the height of COVID, the governor at the time and the mayor at the time started to enforce curfews and were arresting people for not wearing masks. And what I saw very quickly in a very short period of time, I looked at the arrest that came into my office, and of, let's say, the 60-something people had been arrested, everyone but one person was either black or Hispanic. And there was one person, a white woman, who was arrested under that time, and she turned out to be a legal aid attorney who was videoing them arresting others. And so I just quickly said, I'm not going to enforce mask mandates as a criminal act. And it was a big, thing, but the community ultimately supported that. When you come back with the data that supports your reasoning, I think that you're able to do that. And I will say that ultimately, and I think Mark said this, I actually wound up getting a letter from the detectives endowment, saying thank you, because the truth is their members did not want to enforce mask mandates either, and they were being forced into this. So there is common ground, there's friction, there's pushback for sure, but you'll see that mostly with the unions who think they're protecting their membership. And there's the political part of this, right, which is law enforcement generally, military generally tends to be more conservative, will support, usually the conservative candidate in the race. So these things kind of flare up right around election cycles. And once the election cycle is over, things kind of get back to normal, and then 3 years later, as you get ready for that next election cycle, they start to flare up. So what you're seeing right now is, this going across the country because, we're about to have our midterms.
Yeah, I would just start by highlighting that last piece, that it definitely seems to flare up during elections, especially when there is an opponent. In my election I just had, the opponent was handpicked by our police union to run against me. So of course that flared, it made our relationship worse because they were lying to community members about what my office does or doesn't do while they're on duty. And It was being caught on body-worn cameras, and victims were calling me saying, police said you don't prosecute these when I do. But, my hope now that I have won and, can use that and feel stronger in the community that will stop. But the reality is there is a difference between police and police unions, and it's a real one. And it's actually quite astonishing that in Burlington, Vermont, the police were saying the exact same things to community members that they were in Philadelphia and out in San Francisco. Like the Fraternal Order of Police has a playbook and a handbook that they're just giving to folks around the country, which is really unfortunate. But on the flip side of that, I have a full caseload, and I've been a prosecutor in this office for 12 years now. I know so many of these officers, and I was in the trenches with them when I started, and they're now supervisors, and we do have a generally good relationship. I think that one thing I've noticed for sure is that COVID really deteriorated our relationship a lot because we weren't seeing them every day. When in the past we'd be working on cases together in person, and we'd be doing depositions every day, and they'd be in and out of our office for paperwork. And when COVID started, our office completely shut down until September 6th of this year. We just opened our office back up, and our court system just opened back up. So everything was virtual. And, like most things, you lose relationships with people when they don't know you, and especially new officers that are coming in and just hearing stuff without actually knowing any of you. So we've already seen, even in the last month, that we're back in our office and we're engaging with officers in the courthouse. They talk a big talk when they're out in the community, but then when you're actually in a room with them, you realize you're both just human beings trying to do the best you can. And if they do continue to say the stuff that they were saying, we are the ones, I have considered writing Brady letters on officers that continue to lie to the community. And I try to remind them often, I am elected. You are not. And I just won by 22 points. So, you have to kind of come along, or you should find something else to do, find a different profession. So trying to be really friendly with them, because you do have common ground and you want to do what's best for your community, but also making sure they know that it is ultimately up to you.
Yeah, and I just want to piggyback quickly on Sarah, because I think that a defining moment in sort of prosecutor-police relations around the progressive movement was around, the killing of George Floyd, where, policing institutions felt that, elected officials and community members and some prosecutors had abandoned them, had thrown them, to the wolves, and it took a long time to get past those wounds, because that is what I would hear in the private conversations of people who otherwise actually support a lot of the work that we're doing, but they just felt as an institution that they had been, regardless of their behavior, had been left and made to be the bad person. No one wants to be the bad person, right? When prosecutors were under attack for mass incarceration, all prosecutors got attacked, even ones who, as we've said, who've been trying to do the right thing. So I think that it was COVID, but I also think coming after that movement, I wrote a very strong letter after the murder of George Floyd, and I know that it was not appreciated by some.
Let me add just two quick thoughts. In part, Eric, building off of what you said, this has been a very unusual couple of years, a period of time where, because of COVID, there's been more isolation, there's been less in-person proximity, and obviously in the wake of the George Floyd tragedy, there has been this escalating erosion of trust in police. I mean, it was building for a number of years. And so I think that, unfortunately, we also, in the prior administration, saw a fanning of flames of all of this, essentially legitimizing of the FOP's efforts to take the megaphone Whereas the reality is there are a lot of folks in policing who don't subscribe to kind of that us versus them sort of tension, and who have really been just torn apart by what's been happening, and probably agree with these three folks on far more issues than many would presume. So, I think when answering that question in part, the answer is where and who are we talking about? Some leadership in policing does have a very troubled relationship with the DA. But I think even within those departments, if you go to rank and file, they feel very differently. And the other thought I would add is that I think the friction is actually healthy to a large extent. I mean, for many years, prosecutors in many parts of the country have been too close to law enforcement. And that's meant a lack of willingness to hold them accountable or call them out when things go wrong. And there needs to be a positive working relationship. But that friction, that's also healthy, because there needs to be an ability to go after those who commit wrongdoing in police without feeling like somehow that's betraying sort of the relationship and the working order that there needs to be between these, justice system partners.
So we probably have time for one more round. So what I think I'd like to do is take a few questions and bunch them together. So, and then you can kind of pick and choose which ones you respond to, or all of them, and so forth. So Layla, I see you have your hand up. Thank you. But let me just say, I'm sure you can project, but I'm a little concerned about the recording. So it might be better if we use the mic.
Thank you all so much for being here and for your time. We started this session by talking about the impacts of incarceration on people and some of the challenges of incarceration. So how do you deal with the tension of, the detrimental impacts of incarceration on communities and on individuals with the reality that your work involves incarcerating some individuals?
Are there other questions right here?
Thank you. I'm really interested in this question of changing office culture, and you've mentioned things like replacing some of the ADAs and engaging in a data-driven approach. And I'm curious if you could tell us a bit about any pushback that you faced from line prosecutors within your office and what you've done to deal with that.
Over here, there are several. Let's get these three, and then we'll.
Thank you. What advice would you have to prospective first-year prosecutors, and specifically what can line ADAs do on a day-to-day basis to be fair and just prosecutors?
I'm really curious what your relationship has been like with other district attorneys who are maybe taking a more traditional approach, particularly in states where state authorities have threatened to move cases outside of progressive prosecutors' jurisdiction.
This is a big question. I'm sorry to drop it in the lightning round. There's a lot of discussion nowadays about criminal justice reform versus criminal justice abolition. How do you see the role of the progressive prosecutor as playing into the goals of reform or the goals of abolition? And how do you see progressive prosecution changing the shape of the criminal justice system as a whole?
Okay, I think. Okay, Haley, one more. Okay, so before I let the prosecutors answer, can I just say, great questions. Those are all really terrific questions. So I'll let you pick and choose which ones. If you can answer all of them, some of them, and Mark, Miriam says you have to start, Mark.
All right. So I'm going to talk about my relationship with the other district attorneys in Texas. There are 252 different elected district attorneys. And I can tell you from day one, I never wanted to be a district attorney. And I can tell you that when I became the district attorney, I'm still an outsider, and I'm okay with that. And if you ask me, I'll say I'm a defense attorney who got elected to do a job. And so my thing is to change as much as I can. And if I'm out there alone, that's okay, and I'm fine with that. And then I'll let you pass it.
All right. I'm going to take a shot at a couple. I'll start with the pushback and culture change within our own offices. It's a real thing. I think Sarah can speak to this. We had some legitimacy because we were not complete outsiders. I had been in the office 19 years, and so I knew a lot of the people. And from a really, early point in my administration, I knew the people I had to push out the office, and so we did. Being the elected district attorney, this is, you get to pick your staff. And, I have some union folks who I could not move out. There's some DAs have union staff as well. Brooklyn is one of those places. But, it was very important. And so I had a package, which I would call, the safety plan for Brooklyn, which was called Justice 2020. There were 17 recommendations. I'm not going to get into it, but the 4 pillars of that were, reducing incarceration and reliance on convictions and working with our community, making them true partners and stakeholders, some transparency, and working on data issues. And we had weekly Justice 2020 meetings, because when you talk about building culture, it's something that you have to work on. You have to do implementation. I'm here today at Harvard on Halloween instead of being with my 9-year-old, because part of this culture change is bringing in the right people into the office, right? Making sure that all of you, even if you choose not to come to Brooklyn, that you understand that, being a public defender allows you to do a lot of great work for clients, but coming into a DA's office allows you to impact many, many more people. And so part of the culture change is how we hire. Miriam will also tell you that culture change is what we incentivize in our office. I don't post conviction rates or number of trials or the number of indictments. We talk about different metrics of what success looks like, and that's a tremendous part of the culture change. In terms of other prosecutors, the relationship is cordial. They used to, say I was, a defender, because, I was talking about incarceration as the last resort. But, what we've seen, and I think they've seen, is that the movement is growing, and, old school prosecutors, they're not showing better results. And I'll speak for Brooklyn, but, Brooklyn, I've been DA for 6 years. 5 of the 6 years, shootings and homicides were down. The only year shootings and homicides were up was the year of COVID, and then it was way up. But in terms of metrics of safety, when you deal with root causes, when you make your community healthier and you get more resources for your community to deal with problems, you can reduce crime, and that's part of being a progressive prosecutor. The incarceration challenge, I like to say that I'm an aspirational abolitionist. I have a job to do, and as long as there is, and there's a 1% of the population that I don't believe can live in civil society as currently constituted. But it's the aspiration. We make challenges for ourselves about reducing rates of incarceration, rates of conviction, rates of supervision. We work on it. We talk about it. But day in and day out, if I need to send someone to jail, we're going to do that to keep our community safe. But it is a constant conversation in our office. Can we reduce our reliance on jail or prison to keep us safe? And then the last question that I think, there's the first-year prosecutor, but the last question about violent crimes, we work with organizations and survivors of crime every day. And it is a myth that survivors of crime only want to see jail as a remedy for what's happened to them. We work with organizations in Brooklyn that do restorative practices, and when given options, crime victims often will choose other things. It's just that the criminal legal system has only provided one solution or one norm, which is you've been hurt and now we're going to punish the person who hurt you. But when given other choices like restorative justice approaches, and people will think about and choose other things. So the issue of, does every person who commits an act of violence need to be incarcerated? Victims will tell you for themselves what they really want is to be safe, and they really want to make sure that person doesn't hurt them or hurt another person. But when given other options, they often will choose that. And so we've been working to put survivor groups together, and including people who've lost children to violence. And you would be shocked by the number of people who especially don't want to see another African American, another Latino wind up in prison for this, but they just want to make sure the person gets the help they need to live safely in their communities. And first-year prosecutors, there's a lot you can do. In my office, tremendous leeway to the judgment of prosecutors about what's needed to be done to keep us safe. That's a longer answer, but I believe that the future of the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office is going to be on the people that I place there while during the time I'm DA. And so I'm in my second term, these first-year prosecutors in 4 years will be the supervisors, right? It's about 5-6 years to be made a supervisor in the office. That's sort of the lifespan of a DA's office. After 5 or 6 years, people want to make money or do other things. But those who choose a career are often promoted into supervisory ranks in that time. And so this is the time where I'm leaving my legacy behind. My legacy will be the people that I've positioned to run that office when I'm gone.
Okay, I'm going to try. I actually agree with everything that's been said, so I'm not going to repeat stuff. But I was really lucky to have been in a sort of insider. So I did have credibility. I had lunch with every person in that office time and time again. I knew the people I needed to get rid of, and everybody else in the office knew it too. So I didn't have to worry about that aspect. And then I brought in public defenders that we had worked with for years and we had really good relationships with, or people from legal aid. Our interviews are different than I think a lot of prosecutors' interviews probably are. When people are applying to our office to be a prosecutor, and I say, if we pass you over, do you want me to send your resume to all the other state's attorney's offices hiring in Vermont? If they say yes, they are not the prosecutor that I want in our office. It's a trick question because I do not have good relationships with the other state's attorneys in Vermont. And that's very apparent to most people. And the reality from my perspective, though, is my county is the largest in our state by far. We hold over a third of the state's population. So, and all of our media outlets, unfortunately, for better or worse, are in my county. So when I do something, people pay attention to it. It is a very big deal. Legislation is often mimicked after my policies at least once, if not twice, until it passes. So if people, again, are coming to our office because they want to work in my office for particular reasons, those are the people that I want to hire. And so when you do that and you hire that way, those first-year prosecutors already understand why they're in that office. One thing I think, one of the very first policies that I implemented is that we do not use the term defendant. We don't call people defendants. And it's such a small thing, but it actually was the hardest for a lot of people in my office to do because it's ingrained in us as prosecutors to talk about the person that we're charging as a defendant. We throw out their name purposely. I mean, that was a historically purposeful thing to dehumanize the folks that you're prosecuting and not know their names, not care about their names, not care about them. And so, again, I didn't learn that when I became a prosecutor. I learned that in rooms like this. I learned that in law school in my trial advocacy class, that the prosecutor calls them the defendant. So, I think that little things like that over time change that culture, but it does, even for people who are in it for the right reasons, it does sometimes take some time. And, I am too a hopeful abolitionist. I think that I actually get a hard time sometimes because I'm on the board of an abolition organization, a nonprofit that is working towards closing the women's prison in Vermont and not reopening a new one. I'm on the board because I believe in that mission and I believe in that work, but I also recognize that in the meantime, with the options we have, sometimes incarceration is what we have to do. Balancing that, even in extreme violence cases, because Eric's absolutely right that most victims don't actually want that person in jail forever, and balancing it with how long you are going to put that person there, because the evidence is very strong that the longer somebody is in jail, the more likely they are to commit further violence when they come out. So figuring out a good balance of how long you put them in there until you can connect them with whatever outcome you want and getting them back into the community in a safe way, which is not easy, but we try.
So I think the answer to really a lot of those questions is all of you. Because if we're ever really going to shake things up, and if we're ever really going to be able to sustain change and to create those kind of pipelines of people who think differently about what this job can and should be about, it's going to come from people who are willing to shake it up and who are willing to carry forward this very different moment. And so I want to take a minute and talk about our Summer Fellows program. But before I do, let me actually ask, how many of you think you want to be prosecutors? All right, hold on. Before the applause, how many of you think you want to be public defenders? Okay.
Yes.
How many of you think you want to be advocates for children or civil rights lawyers or go into, some other realm of the policy or advocacy world? Okay. So most of you raised your hand on the first one, but I would suggest that those of you who didn't raise your hand in that first question and did for the subsequent ones, we need you every bit as much and perhaps even more than the first group. Because if these offices are really going to change culture, if they're really going to grapple with your question up there about abolitionism, if they're really going to, Layla, grapple with your question about how do we undo the damage of mass incarceration, we need people who are willing to come in and say, I want to fight for those people who have names, not labels. I want to fight for the human story behind every person. I want to fight for the recognition that, as Brian Stevenson and others constantly remind us, no one should be defined by their worst day. I want to fight for the people that, as Eric described, and these folks are doing, who have been thrown away by sentences that are decades long and really don't need to be behind bars because they are doing nobody any harm. I want to fight for the notion that even as we're aspiring to something very different, we at least have to stop doing the damage that mass incarceration has done. We at least need prosecutors to say, my job first and foremost, at a minimum, should be to stop doing damage, to realize that there are so many people who come into contact with the criminal legal system because they need help. And what they need is not a jail cell. They need treatment. They may need support. They may need public health or mental health response. They don't need law enforcement to be called out when they're in a crisis. They don't need to be put behind bars so we can treat them and help them. They don't need to be churned through the criminal justice system. And for us to continue to waste millions and billions of dollars, waste lives, and damage communities. So first and foremost, we need to stop doing harm. And so we need a generation that's going to come behind these folks and keep carrying that thought forward. And so that is what we've been trying to do in our Summer Fellows program. We are now entering into our 6th year. Each of these folks has had Summer Fellows in their programs. I think, Mark, you had the first Harvard Law student who had no idea what she was getting into when she went to Nueces County. And next thing she knew, she was co-trying a case with you, Mark, right? Co-counsel on a case. We have put into these offices individuals who reflect the different starting point and the breaking of glass ceilings that these folks reflect. We try to create a diversity pipeline, but we're also looking for folks who never in a million years thought that they would want to consider being a prosecutor, but are willing to spend a summer with these folks because they are so different than your typical prosecutor. That's what we're looking for. And every summer fellow is patched together through a network with the rest of the summer fellows. They have these wonderfully personal Zoom calls with these leaders and others to learn about how they think about these issues. They work on a policy project. They have the ability to kind of then become part of our alumni group. And we actually now have had at least one alumni who has run for state's attorney and held that job on an interim basis. So we now have nearly 100 alums from the program. And I think I want to end with a very short 2-minute video that shows you their voices and these voices about what that Summer Fellows program is about. If you want information about the Summer Fellows program, I know we've passed it around. If you have questions about it, let me know. Ask any of these folks. They have all had Summer Fellows. And we hope you'll consider, if not spending a summer doing this work, at least think about the need for those who want to change the world, who want to be part of the fight, how dramatically different it is to bring that energy and that vision into a prosecutor's office and change it from within. So again, thank you, Alex, for all of this.
Well, it's for me to thank all of you, Mark, Eric, Sarah, Miriam. Thank you for taking the time to come speak to the students. But more importantly, thank you for your work, for your leadership, for your incredibly inspirational work that you do. It's just really amazing. I just think it's amazing. So thank you. And please join me in thanking all of them.
Oh, and we would love if you can take a minute for the students to just fill in the survey. It's sort of our effort to kind of see, are we achieving a change in this next generation as well? Thank you, Rebecca.
Also, sorry, one last thing that you forgot to plug your book.
I did.
The book, I think, is available at the Harvard Co-op.
It is. So it just came out a week before last, and it tells the story of each of these three folks and a number of others who are part of this movement, and their personal stories and their background and how they came to this job. It is so different from the traditional pathway to elected DAs. So, their stories, I think, are what make the book a great read. It's not often you find somebody like Chesa, who grew up visiting his parents, passing through prison walls. It's not often, you find individuals who spent their careers, like Larry Krasner or Mark or others as criminal defense lawyers. It's not often you find an elected DA with "not guilty" tattooed on his chest, Mark Gonzalez. So they're just
covered it up.
We didn't get to that, yeah, but they're very different, and so encourage you to, pick up a copy and read more about these folks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.